Great. So it's a pleasure to be here on the walk down. One of our previous offices used to be just a block away. I remember whenever we had Wi-Fi issues, we'd all come over here, as sort of a safe space to reconnect back to the world. Fortunately for us, we've graduated. Wireless is a bit better as the business is growing and as our IT has matured. But today, I want to talk about a more general topic outside of what we do at Simon Data, and certainly outside of internet networking and wireless. But really just want to talk about data more broadly. In the context of you have a business, either you're an entrepreneur or you're a founder, or you work on a data team, or you're a technologist, and you're trying to ask the question, how do I become more data driven? How do I put a strategy in place? How do I build my technology? How do I build my team? And really, how do I think about where I need to be, next year and 5 years and beyond? 20 years ago, I think this would have been a very different conversation. When you look at the internet, when you look at what AWS is powering today, I think it's really a next generation of technologies that in some sense are defined by their ability to collect data, to analyze data, and then to ultimately leverage data to drive their business forward. And when you look at some of the technological changes that have happened, and again, here are just some some examples on the top. It's funny. I mean, Simon Data has been around now for 4 or 5 years, and we went to market just as Redshift has gone to market. I don't know how many people in the audience are familiar with Amazon Redshift. It's a data warehousing technology. And Amazon's innovation is that it's so accessible now. And if you look at the larger ecosystem of data infrastructure, how it looks today as opposed to how it looked 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago, this stuff is so much more accessible. It's much easier to scale and to store terabyte and petabyte scale data. It's much easier to build real-time systems that track your customers and inventory, with minute or very low levels of latency and high levels of granularity. And really, when I reflect back on the 15 or 20 years that I've been practicing as an engineer, as a researcher, as an entrepreneur, building data-focused businesses, the technology evolution has been tremendous. Data scientists, it's a super sexy job, super popular job. No one knows quite what it is, partly because it's not really properly defined. But that being said, if you just do a raw analysis of how the industry is heading and how people are defining themselves in the market and how companies are looking for talent, the data scientist is certainly a fast-growing job. And then finally, sort of addressing my initial point, everything is digitized. It's so easy to put a pixel up on your website and measure how people are visiting your business, how people are finding out about your business and more. And this stuff is completely table stakes. And when you look at the next generation of capabilities, Internet of Things, what Amazon is doing with Alexa in the home, and certainly how Google and Apple are pushing iPhone and mobile. Really, the amount of information we have to understand your business, is 100x where it was 5 years ago as well. So, I think for many people these sort of trends are pretty obvious, but I think it's important to start at a place of agreement. And so getting to the meat of the topic today, I really just want to drive home how important it is to build a data strategy, and the question is why. Maybe we'll sort of start with a show of hands here so I can get a sense of the audience. How many people in the room are engineers? How many people work for startups that are smaller than 100 people? Smaller than 20? Smaller than 10? And how many are founders? Great. Okay, so this is helpful. So, I think for anyone who's been in a board meeting recently or had exposure to board meetings, the questions are always, what's your data strategy? How are you thinking about really owning your data assets and leveraging them to maintain your competitive advantage and your sustainable advantage? And the question I ask here is why do you want to do this? And again, we'll sort of start with some first principles here across 3 dimensions. And the first is insights. Data enables you to develop better understanding for your business. As an operator, as a founder, as an executive, as an engineer, everyone has intuition about how things work. You have guesses about how you think things work, and data is a great way, of either confirming the way you think the world works, or leading to more questions about how it actually works and how you can maybe do things better. The second point is one of organization. You think about a company that has more than 2 people, as you approach 20 people, as you go beyond 100 people. You need ways of organizing the business, and certainly there are many things to this effect. Making sure that your CEO can set clear direction and that your management function is in place. But from my perspective, I think data is a very important component there. If you're able to set clear goals, if you're able to set clear key performance indicators, and if everyone in the organization can align in the same direction and optimize towards a common and well understood and objective direction, then it makes conversations a lot easier. It drives for much greater alignment, and I think it's really an effective multiplier. Forcing function, if you will. And then finally, once you have a degree of excellence around your data competencies, there's a tremendous amount you can do in terms of optimization. If you're building an e-commerce business and you have back office operations and you're trying to predict demand and make sure that you don't produce too many widgets, so that your inventory doesn't become more costly. Or if you're a box delivery service and you're trying to optimize box packing with with respect to requirements and personalized preferences. Or if you're in a marketing function and you're trying to optimize some of your ongoing spend. There are a tremendous number of things you can do, from recommendations to search to other sorts of back office operations, where you can leverage data directly, to drive ROI, to improve your customer experience, to make your business more effective, and I guess really make sure that your customers have the best experience possible. Finally, everyone else is doing it. And I think it's a good reminder. I guess these are a bit out of order, and then we're missing the G. If when I went to when I graduated college, Microsoft was the place to go, and now it's the FANGs. I was introduced to this acronym recently. But if you look at one defining factor across these 4 businesses, it's their ability to leverage data. Facebook's, the entirety of Facebook's revenue is based off of their customer data on how they're able to analyze it, and then how they're able to go and sell those ads in a very automated fashion, scalable fashion, to brands across the globe, in a way that drives ROI. That fundamentally is a data competency. Netflix, has engagement numbers through the roof. That's in large part due to their ability to understand the engagement data, understand and collect how customers view movies, view content, engage with content, and then from there build personalized experiences. That make sure that their customers who are paying $10, $15, $20 a month spend a large amount of time on the service and make sure they continue to see value from it. And then Amazon, they know everything in your home, and they just basically tell you what you need to buy tomorrow, and then you buy it, and they make lots of money. So that's sort of 3 very basic examples I think everyone understands. And if I were to give the same talk, on the same stage, 5 to 10 years from now, I'm sure these 3 guys will still be powerhouses, but there'll be another set of 5 or 10 that will be equally as large, and I'm sure there'll be 5 to 10 similar examples of how they use data to drive the business. Great. So let's get moving here. The meat of the talk here is really meant to address how do you build your data strategy? What are the steps to get there? And to my earlier point, I think there's a lot of things going on in the market that make this a lot easier than it used to be. Great. So when you think about building a data foundation, and you think about where to start, a good analogy I like to use is thinking about sort of surveillance cameras in a mall. Businesses are super complex. Malls are super complex. You can enter a mall through the parking lot. You can walk in the front door. You can, in New York, you can take the subway to a mall. When you're in the mall, you can walk around and get exercise. You can also, go to anchor stores and, fill up your bag with Macy's stuff, or you can go up to the food court and eat Taco Bell or whatever you do at malls. But at the end of the day, if you think about this surveillance problem, you only get, sort of a limited view of what's going on. Yes, it is possible to put, cameras in every single nook and cranny, but it's just not realistic. I think when you sort of think about data measurement, which is really the foundation of anything you're doing, you really want to take a step back, think about your business, and think about what are all the touch points that your business has with the customer. What are all the the points of friction that might exist in my back office operations, with my inventory, with what is anything else which I'm concerned about the business that I want better insight on, and really just ask how can I make sure that I can measure the most critical aspects of what I'm doing. And I think my answer here, without being specific to any one's particular business, is the ideal setup requires making sure you have a broad view of everything, and then being thoughtful about where you want to zoom in. And we'll get to that in a bit more specificity here. But if you have the mall and you're saying, hey, my first problem with the mall is I got to fill it up with people. Well, let's make sure that we really zoom in on where they come from. Are they driving to the mall? They walk into the mall? Are they taking the subway? Maybe that could give us some insight on getting more people to come. Right. And with this, sort of giving examples. I mean, you think about a company which is digitized. You think about Zappos, who's brought your traditional shoe experience to the online world. With Zappos, they've digitized a lot of these experiences. You can you try on size 9, 10, 11. They all ship to you. Sizes 9 and 10 get sent back to Zappos. Now Zappos has some information about what fits you. They also have information about what doesn't fit you. If you went to Foot Locker and went through that same process, someone would help you bring out shoe sizes 9, 10, 11, and with 100% certainty, Foot Locker is not measuring those shoes that you tried on but didn't buy. But at the same time, look, you buy a pair. If you're Zappos, customers buy your shoes and they buy the same pair of shoes 3 months later. Well, what happened? Was it because that's the only pair of shoes you bought? Was it because you wore them into the ground because they were defective? Was it because for whatever reason you like having two of the same pair of shoes? There's data. There's still going to be data gaps. There's still going to be that offline experience. And while certainly technology is never ever going to cover everything, you want to make sure that you're thinking holistically and thinking about what you can measure. When you think about your business strategy, your data strategy, obviously there's a lot of value in digitizing parts of the experience, because then you can measure it and you can optimize it. But I guess the salient point here is to is once you have a data strategy, you'll be at a point where you're optimizing the things that you can measure. And you always have those things that you can't measure, and it doesn't mean that those things can't drive your business forward or can't be an important part of your strategy. For Zappos, if they have brands that are wearing down very quickly, well, they should try to figure that out and have conversations with whatever the manufacturer is to try to remediate the situation. But again, that'll be very different than when Zappos looks at their return rates for sizing and whatnot. So getting into some, some brass tacks here and some more examples. I tried to pick 3 categories of 3 functions that most businesses have. Some at least most internet businesses have some sort of investment in. Number 1, sort of customer-facing aspects. If you think about customer support, if you think about returns, if you have a sales function, really just thinking about how do people within your business interact with their customers, and then more broadly, how does the business interact with their customers? Are they buying physical goods? Are they downloading an application? Getting to the second point, thinking about those fully digitized experiences. How are people arriving at your website? When they do arrive at your website, what are they looking? How are they engaging? If they're searching, thinking about measuring this, and recording the search terms of what they're looking for. That can be interesting around thinking through supply and demand. But again, it all depends on what you care about. Excuse me. And then you have all sorts of back office operations, including customer support, like I said initially, to to inventory, to box packing. A good friend of mine ran data at Birchbox, and it's these incredibly complex optimization problems where they're trying to design their personalization algorithms to put the right items in the boxes, and then make sure they don't run out of whatever face cream when they get to that last half of their boxes. And again, I mean, they need to know exactly what inventory they have. They need to know exactly about how they can pack the boxes. There's a tremendous amount of complexity there. So once you've identified this core piece of the business that you want to measure, the next thing you want to think about is the relationship between them. In the next section, in a few minutes, we'll get to analysis. And the first thing you'll do with respect to analysis is you'll count, how many people are using my product, how many people return size 9 shoe, how many people, got a box with face cream or whatever in it. But the next thing beyond that you're going to want to think through is what I'll call flows. Flows are just sequences of measurements that you made. A fundamental invariant to your business is time, and when you want to sort of track how inventory flows through your supply chain, or how customers interact with your product, or how they purchase off your website, you're going to want to be able to stitch together different things they did. So you spent $30, you gave $30 to Facebook, they found your business, that same hour they made their first purchase, a month and a half later they bought again, they actually returned that second purchase, they have experiences downstream, talk to support, browse some more, search for more, make subsequent purchases, and then at the end of the day, after a year, you sort of take a step back and you ask, hey, what happened with this one customer? Yes, like, their acquisition costs were $30, they spent, $100 with their lifetime value, and that's, the derive calculation from the float. And then, of course, once you're able to build this view across one flow, you aggregate it across many. But it's very important if you're thinking about building this view, that you think about these linear progressions. And if you're missing a point, like if you don't have proper visibility into returns, then look, like if your return rate for the business is 10%, you're going to have some pretty inaccurate measurements, across a lot of your core flows and funnels that you want to measure. I don't want to get too in the weeds with this slide, but look, when you put it all together, and again, this is sort of a precursor to a few things we'll be talking about in the next sort of two sections. At the top level, you have the business, and again, thinking about the different touch points that exist between users and product, and your back office and everything, in that sort of point of triangulation. Within that, you have your application, and ultimately you want to make sure that you have some way of centralizing your data. In steady state, it will be your data lake, or whatever new sexy data store there is. For those of you who raised your hand with a 2 or 3 person startup, it might be an Excel spreadsheet that is thoughtful, plus maybe Google Analytics, which is free, and that's where you start. And then finally, on the bottom tier, you have different applications that leverage this data, both for insights to help you make decisions and to drive business processes. So, analytics to understand where do your visitors come from, what's the ROI on my spend from Facebook and Google Ads, how do I send targeted emails, how can I sort of build some graphs and charts that track high-level business KPIs over time. And then other applications like CRM and ERP. Great. So once you have the bits in place, it's the infrastructure that can house the data and can serve as a foundation. The next step is to do some analysis. So with this section, I'm not going to get too in the weeds around specific technologies, but I'll start with some use cases just to sort of provide some lowest common denominator views of what these data analyses might be, and then I'll talk about how to think about building a technology set that you can bring to your organization and what that looks like. So a couple of use cases. The first is product analysis. And when I say product, in this case, I'm sort of just talking about your digital product. For an e-commerce business, your shopping experience. For Instagram, it might be the whole experience of viewing photos or uploading photos or posting. And really, the sort of the 3 stages that I alluded to, 2 of them a few minutes ago. The first is just basic usage. So if you sell soap, how many jars of soap did you sell in Q3? That would be the first question you want to ask. With that, what was your total revenue? I mean, what were your margins from the soap? Whatever that might be. The second step is then looking at that from a flow perspective. So in a customer's journey to buy soap, what did that look like? So how do they find out about your business? What was their consideration process like before they purchased? And then what were their purchase rates? So if you have an e-commerce business, you might want to think about a funnel from 1,000 people land on your homepage. Among those 1,000, 800 end up viewing at least one product page. Among those 800 review a product page, 100 add something to their cart. And then among that 100 people added to their cart, 30 got confused with shipping addresses and credit card numbers and anything else, and finally 75 or whatever ended up purchasing. So, that funnel would look something like 1,000 people came in, and then you have a 7.5% conversion rate going out. And that's sort of thinking about your funnel, and of course, once you sort of are able to measure the funnel, the next question asked is how do I optimize it, and what are the follow-up points, and where do people get confused, or is the soap too expensive, and things like that. And then finally, the end goal of the business, for most businesses, with some exceptions, is not to just get someone to to go through this process once, but to really make sure that you're able to define this value from a product perspective in a continued fashion. I think with Facebook, it's like this is like so old school now, but it's like once you have 8 friends or 15 friends or something, once you go through that process n times and get that network, then they sort of found that you're sufficiently invested in the platform and you start using it more. Every business sort of has these inflection points, but really thinking about how does this relate to what you're doing, and how do you really drive that long-term habit-forming behavior that ultimately will dictate the success of most businesses. Certainly, the things that we sort of talked about in the beginning of the talk. Second, table stakes use case, marketing attribution. Last month you spent $100,000 on Facebook ads. In that same month you sold $2 million worth of stuff. What does that mean? Well, it really depends on, among that $2 million in inventory, what percent actually came in through Facebook, and how you measure that. Modeling actual consumer process is tremendously difficult. But there's a tremendous amount of best practices and a lot of technology. Google Analytics is a free tool that basically every business uses in some capacity that gets you somewhere between 10% and 95% or even 100% there. But what do you want to measure here? The first is just like basic channels and spend. Where are you spending your money? Where are people coming from, and what does that look like? The second is the most basic and table stakes form of attribution. It's called last click attribution. If you sold a bar of soap, that same customer may have clicked in from Google, but the day before may have first found out about you from Facebook. So how do you think about those 2 clicks? Last click attribution is just a very, very simple way of attributing a sale to the last paid click that someone came from a marketing channel or an ad channel. And then there means a multi-touch attribution that they're much more sophisticated in looking at the different ways that you may have discovered a brand or a product in your shopping experience. So I want to talk a few minutes once you sort of identify these use cases for your organization. So we're going to build our data strategy. We're going to make sure we measure the website. We're going to have our referral tracking in place. We're going to make sure that our support system records all tickets and if they're resolved or not. And we're going to also really make sure to record all of our sales along with margins and costs and basket sizes or whatever. You have that in place, and then you define your core use cases, whether it be some checkout funnels, or whether it be thinking through attribution from your marketing channels or both. The next question is delivery. How do you enable the organization to do these types of analyses? What does that look like? And fundamentally, there are like 2 ways you can do it. The first way you can do it is you can invest in tools. that you can give to people in your company. They can use these tools and they can come to these conclusions on their own. The other way you can do it is you can invest in people, and people can then go do the work for individuals in your business and tell them the answer. We'll get into the pros and cons of the two in a second here, but the answer is that you actually want to do both. When you're thinking about making sure whether you're in engineering or on a data team and you're thinking about how do I deliver these things to the organization, you want to make sure you have tools so that people can do these explorations on their own, but you also want to make sure you have proper support such that your organization will be successful. I think with many of these things there's tremendous complexity, and certainly even if you invest in tooling, you're still going to have people, who are engineers and data practitioners who set up the tooling. You're going to want a level of delivery with that. So when we sort of just contrast some of the differences between, self-serve and full-serve, when you think about self-service, if you're a huge organization, I was met today with the former head of data from American Express, and he's very, he's always thinking about. She just left a few months ago, but he was always thinking about, how do you service an organization with tens of thousands of people? I mean, he had a data team with 400 or 500, talented, analysts, but at the end of the day, you can only scale that so much. So you need to think, hey, if we're going to be, driving next generation marketing attribution and analytics, how do we really make sure, how can we really service that? And I think, a great thing there is scale. So the second point was self-service. If you need to build, for a large organization, self-service obviously provides scale. That's the first thing. The second thing is with that scale, when you think about, if you're supporting a marketing team or an operations team with 1,000 people or even 100 people or even 10 people for that matter, when you have self-service workflows, it's much easier for individuals to be completely data-driven, completely autonomous. So if you're there sitting all day optimizing Facebook ads, and on average it takes someone 2 hours to click from an ad and then buy something, you'll get to a point where you have enough volume where maybe you can run 3-4 experiments in a day. And if you need, an analyst in the loop for that, that might, take the feedback cycle from 4 times a day to 1 time a day, or maybe even 1 time every other day. So I think, that first point and really enabling, customers to integrate data into their core workflows is an important one. The third point here, I think, when you think about where you want to start, your first foray into building a data strategy and a team or maturing where you are is going to be characterized by data that's incorrect, data models that are always changing, definitions that feel as if they're moving out from underneath of you. At the end of the day, if you're more full service, you can have a point of responsibility there. You can have someone who can educate, stakeholders and individuals across the organization. I'm sorry, yes, yesterday this meant something, but that was nonsensical. So today means something else, and I'm here, so we can work through this together, and get to a better place. And then the final bit here, sort of on in a similar vein, is if you're earlier in your strategy and things are going to change and you're going to be building towards new use cases and new sources of data and other sort of changes like that, it's much easier to adapt if you have more of a full service model. And of course, if you're self-serve, when you get to a point of scale, like every piece of data you have, should be documented. If you work at a bigger organization, you may have heard of something called a data dictionary. It's sort of an exhaustive cataloging of everything that there is, but that requires a degree of maturity, and a degree of scale. So I'll talk a few minutes around some specific technologies, that are sort of best practices, for tooling. Web analytics, as I said before, Google actually acquired Google Analytics, I think like 15 years ago. I don't remember the name of the business. I don't know if anyone in the audience knows the name of the business they acquired, but Google bought Google Analytics so they could sell more AdWords. It's been tremendously successful. It's sort of it's the de facto standard that people use today, to measure their ad spend, not just on Google, but on Facebook as well today, ironically. But there are plenty of other web analytics platforms out there as well. When you think about product insights, when you think about really deeper funnel analyses, the example I gave with the soap and the checkout, did people fail to check out because their credit card numbers got confused, or the billing address form was buggy or unintuitive or whatnot. You'll want to use one of these product analytics suites. Two of them, Amplitude and Mixpanel, fairly popular. And then once you have a data warehouse, a data lake, more of a centralized data effort, you'll want to build and put a so-called business intelligence platform on top of that, which is effectively a smart way of running SQL and then generating charts and graphs that can be consumed by your data team and moreover individuals throughout your organization. The final class I'll put here is these A/B testing tools. So when you think about the insights you might get from funnel analysis, you might want to run a test to say, hey, if I make the checkout page from three steps to 2 steps, does it increase my conversion rate or not? And there are a whole bunch of platforms you can use there. And of course, one of the main points I made earlier, sort of really is drive home that every one of these tools can be deployed in both a completely self-service manner and a full-service manner. And my major point here is just being thoughtful, in delivery. If you're going to be focusing on marketing attribution and deploying Google Analytics across the organization, what seems like an obvious self-serve platform oftentimes is not. There's a tremendous amount of complexity and detail that this requires. Certainly, minimally gets to get it off the ground and in steady state as well. So just thinking about what that support looks like to make sure that your organization is successful. Great. So let's talk about building a team. You need to start somewhere. So we'll talk about data hire number 1. You can call this person a data scientist. I'm not 100% sure what a data scientist even is. So instead, I'll just describe what skills you want, and you guys can decide on your own how to market it. So the first, there's sort of 3 competencies. The first competency is you really want someone who understands the business. If you're a founder, if you're a stakeholder in an organization, you really want to make sure that you can speak a language that you understand. It's very easy for these conversations to get overly technical and for people to talk past each other. Really, I think that's number 1. Number 2 is they need to be technically very strong. So they need to be able to, very adeptly, get their hands dirty with data, not be afraid, of taking something which seems like a giant mess and then writing SQL and doing other sorts of data cleaning, to take something which is messy and make it clean. I think they must know SQL. Ideally, they should have some programming experience. I don't think they necessarily need to be a full stack or back-end software engineer. I think they have to be highly analytical. They need to be able to take the output of the SQL. They need to be able to put it into a spreadsheet, and they need to be able to do several degrees of analysis to translate that raw data into the business requirement, and then do so in a way that that they are able to communicate effectively and clearly to the organization. I think your first data hire should not be someone who comes in and solves your business problems. Your first data hire is someone who comes in and facilitates a conversation. Someone who comes in and can maybe force you to ask more questions. But it's from my perspective, I think it's really about building a competency where you have a business with very strong fundamentals, intuition, and data as a supporting function. And I think the two really need to be in lockstep. When you think about building out the team, there's sort of 3 categories of competencies that I think require focus. So whether this is hires 2, 3, and 4, or hires 50, 100, and 150, I think these are broadly the categories that I try to think through. Data engineering, again, they sort of roughly follow some of the competencies in the talk. Data engineering is the nuts and the bolts. How do you ensure that if you have a piece of JavaScript on your website and it measures whenever anyone added something to a cart, that it's working, with every single time that someone adds something to their cart. These things break all the time. They're very easy to break. For many businesses, as they're building a competency around data engineering, things will break for weeks, and then someone will ask, what's going on here, and then you'll have lost data for weeks, and it's unrecoverable. That's sort of one example. Of course, as you grow larger, governance is super important. GDPR, for anyone who's had to deal with customer data, I think data is a double-edged sword. There's tremendous potential you can do with it, but if you're not responsible, you're both going to have some very unhappy customers, and certainly when you look at how legislation is catching up here, you'll run into even more problems there. The second class of hires is your analyst, and I think it's very important to differentiate people who are specialists with machine learning, what I'll call data scientists, from more general analysts. An analyst is someone who can take data and bridge it in to a business process. An analyst is someone who's very good with Excel. An analyst is someone with excellent communication skills, who can make a business case, can support a business case, or can make a case against something. But an analyst is not someone who necessarily has to apply higher order logic, to solve a problem. And when you think about self-service or full-service models, your analyst will be the point of delivery in a full-service model, or your analyst will be a point of refinement for your tooling, or both. And data scientists, they do deeper analyses. They're the ones who are going to be building your recommendation system, optimizing your search algorithms, optimizing your back office operations. They'll be doing much more bespoke and specific things to optimize to optimize your business. Great. So let me talk about culture for wrapping up sort of phase 3 here. And as I said before, one of the goals of an effective data strategy is alignment. And I think that alignment really starts, with what I'm calling, with KPIs or key performance indicators. And I think, making sure that your business strategy is in line with a number, I think is really critical to build a data culture. If you have a business objective which is decoupled from data, it's very hard to ladder that down to the rest of the organization. Some examples of a KPI, user volume KPIs, how many people use your product in the last 90 days, engagement KPIs, how much time do they use the product, how many bars of soap do they buy in the quarter, and then anything else, how many times did you have to support a return for an item that was defective, whatever it might be. With this, once you have your goals in place, once those goals are aligned with your KPIs, you can then start laddering it down into the organization. And I think with this, I sort of call it the 5 whys. Whether you're the CEO of a massive business who's ultimately responsible for satisfying your KPIs and your quarterly or your yearly goals, or you're like the most junior marketing analyst, it's very important to understand, if I'm able to, increase the efficacy of my checkout funnel by 5%, then that means my people will buy 5% more. So my customers, instead of being worth $10 each, are worth $10.50 each, and that means now I can spend 5% more money on Google AdWords, which means if you look at which means I can buy more ads and get more people to come and shop ultimately. So making sure that from an organizational perspective, people know to ask those questions. People know how to ladder their lowest level of data up to company-wide goals. And I think a really important construct here is something is this dashboarding. And I think this is a visual way of looking at what you need to affect, and making sure that you can have that information hierarchy that ladders down, so that if you have a team of folks who are trying to optimize the checkout funnel, there might be 5 different steps on it, and each one might be a different grid in a table or whatnot. And the final bit, this is a bit fun. In my previous startup, we've actually yet to institute it at Simon. We used to have a guy by the name of Metric Man who would appear every Monday morning and announce the metrics. I think really one of the goals that that I pushed here was you really want data to sort of be this additional superhero you have on your side, and really make sure that data is an asset for your organization. Because if this isn't done properly, it can be a weapon, and people can use these things to to shoot down ideas and not really be constructive. So I think it's very important to maintain things in a positive way. Great. So I'm going to use the last few minutes to talk about emerging platforms and AI and a few things that we're building at Simon. And then after that, we can dive into questions. I think we're doing well on time. Great. So when you look at that sort of third competency, I talked about why do you need a data strategy? What does this get you? And I think when I look at where we are, in the larger scheme of data and machine learning, in this broader topic, we're really in the early innings. I think if you're at a place where you have a solid data foundation, if you're at a place where you have an organization that can think creatively about data and can think critically about data, I think the next step beyond that is to really use data to drive business processes. There've been a variety of breakthroughs in the last 3, 5, 10 years that have really redefined the way people use data to drive their businesses. You look at deep learning and a lot of statistical machine learning. This has been responsible for a lot of the machine translation breakthroughs. Today you can go to Google, and their algorithms are better than any human is at translating text. If you look at what's powering self-driving cars, a lot of this is deep learning and advances in neural networks. Sort of a second class is so-called stochastic optimization. I recently saw a YouTube video of Amazon's latest warehouses. They're just like crazy. It's like Walmart times 100. And the question is like, where do things go? Well, Walmart optimizes so that when you're pushing your cart down down the aisles, you buy as much stuff as possible or whatever they optimize for. Amazon is optimizing directly to minimize times with the cherry pickers for the guys who are and the women who are packing the boxes. These are just like tremendously hard problems, and they have staff of many smart people who are working hard to optimize every last inch of cherry picker travel. And then the final bit that that we're actually focused on a bit at my startup is something called multi-arm bandits. And if you think about this problem of looking at data and predicting what's going to happen, are my customers happy? Are they not happy? This customer came yesterday. What for Netflix? Like if this customer came yesterday, they looked at 3 movies. What might they want to look at tomorrow? It's a problem of predicting. Multi-arm bandits, seek to say, hey, well, you don't want to just predict what your customers are going to want. You want to give them new experiences. You want to make suggestions, and you really need this feedback loop. So if you have the option to show people 3 different movies, which one will they respond to best, and what does that feedback look like? Feedback loop look like, whether you're optimizing your recommendations or your search algorithms or whatnot. And I'll talk about that for a couple minutes here. So really when I look at some of the, one of the most core problems around optimizing your business, I think it has 2 discrete, components. The first is one of looking at your customers or looking at any business process and understanding it at the most granular level possible. For an individual, are they going to go and buy a car tomorrow? When do we think they're going to need their next jar of soap? When do we expect them, if they bought a mattress, when do we expect them to come again and buy pillows and sheets? And what does that look like based off of historical data, based off how that customer has interacted with the business in the past and recently, and what do you and how, based off of what you understand about the customer today, what's your best guess on their intent and their tendencies to take an action tomorrow? And so that problem broadly is characterized as behavioral inference. The second point of this feedback loop, though, is affecting change. As a business, you want to make sure your customers are incentivized, to buy a pillow. You want to make sure that they understand why the soap that you're selling is actually more organically and holistically healthy soap than what they'll get at the Walmart down the street or wherever they tend to go otherwise. So with this, it's really a matter of thinking through, if I'm predisposed, 80% to make a purchase, what can the business do to make sure that I'm 100% likely to make that purchase? And what are those levers? Is it a matter of thinking through content and messaging? Is it a matter of maybe sending me an email? Is it a matter of building deeper recommendations that appear on a homepage of the business when you land there? Or is it a matter of pricing or promotion? Who knows? It can be anything. But from my perspective, when you look at some of the big advances that are yet to come in machine learning and AI with respect to optimizing business outcomes, I think this is an area that involves not just analyzing data, but building experiments and trying things out and thinking creatively about content and joining that into this larger predictive problem. So with that, that's all I have for today, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jason. That was great. So let's start off with some questions. I actually had one. I had a list of questions, but then I thought of one for you, and then we'll go to the audience and see if they've got some. Start thinking of your questions. Otherwise, I've got to go back to the list and ask questions. But I had a question today that I did not answer well or could not answer well, and maybe you could answer it. So I had a question today from somebody who, we get a lot of people that come in that are maybe career changing or technology changing or maybe going from on-prem to the cloud or looking at this or looking at that. And the question was data science, data scientist. It's very hot, pays very well, everything like that. So I get that question a lot. I want to become a data scientist. How do I do it? Right? Where's a good place to start and what's the roadmap to go down? What do you think about that?
I mean, there are many ways. I mean, there are two sides of this. So first is an individual, I'll answer two questions, one which you asked and one which is related. So the first question is if you're an individual and you want to get into data science, how do you get into the role?
Exactly.
The second question is if you're a business and you're looking to hire data scientists, who maybe are or aren't data scientists today. How do you think about building them within your org or how to hire them?
How do you? How would you retrain some of your existing employees, things like that? So it's similar type questions.
Exactly. So I mean, again, when you sort of think about this continuum between an analyst and a machine learning practitioner, if you're looking for someone to come and really do some machine learning, some deeper AI analysis. If you're looking for someone who's optimized search experiences or recommendation systems, you're going to want someone with a bit more of an academic and sort of formal background in machine learning. That's going to be important. Again, though, I think a lot of the demand for data scientists, and I think what a lot of businesses need today, isn't as deeply technical as that. And instead, I think they just really need people, who are naturally oriented to data, can hack on SQL, maybe know some programming languages, and just as importantly, understand the business and communicate well. So I think to that effect, thinking about folks in finance, thinking about folks who are maybe junior marketing analysts, folks who have had these data roles, in functions that aren't just data functions. I think that's a great starting point to potentially recruit out of, to make junior data science hires, or to invest into, to promote from within.
Okay, good. And a similar answer I struggled with, and I think a great place is to start with, like I said, with the technology. You're not just going to take somebody who's not a data scientist and make them a data scientist overnight. Right. But data is you should, if you don't know databases, you should know databases. You should start learning that.
Yep.
And I also pointed them towards, of course, AWS certifications. Start going down at least the solution architect certification because you need to know what the products are to at least architect a solution. So let's go to the audience. Who's got, raise your hand and I'll bring a mic over to you and you can ask a question.
I'm actually sorry, I have a very small attention span. What I actually wanted to know, like this one question that I had right from the beginning of the thing is, can you tell me a little bit, I'll tell you a little bit about me. My name is Sameer Tendulkar. I'm a Python Django web app developer, and I want to start my own business. So can you tell me, how, before you started your own business, what did you do? What exactly is your business, and how are you doing? Like, how many people do you have working for you now? In a small, like a very short answer, because I don't have a long.
Yeah, no, I think, prior to, so I have an academic machine learning background. Back in the day, I worked at Google, and in the last 10 years, I've been an entrepreneur. And really the problem that we're solving at Simon Data ultimately comes from enabling businesses to leverage their data, to engage and retain their customers in marketing and product experiences.
So supposing Amazon, like you said, Amazon sells stuff. So your company actually helps them show different products, like what the audience should buy. Is that what your company?
Yeah, so it's what they should buy, when they should buy it, who should buy it, and furthermore, how do you message them to buy it? So, you can message them on the website, you can send them an email, you can target them with an ad, you can include a flyer in their box, you can make sure that the customer service, rep, knows an answer, so when you go and complain to Amazon about your defective item, they know how to remediate.
Oh, okay. So you actually do research on what stuff got returned and why it got returned and what. Okay, okay. Now I know what you're doing. So how was the path of you starting the business? Like you started the business with how many people and where are you now?
Yeah, so when we started the business with 3 people and now we're 70? Yeah, 70.
Another question? Let's see. Do one more up here, and then I'll go to the back.
Hey, so this kind of culture and these kinds of methods are obviously tremendously helpful when you're talking about very large quantities of data.
Yep.
What I wonder is, to what extent and in what ways can you derive value from these things also in the early stages when you're still growing and your user base may not be as large?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think, look, for us, we don't have a tremendous number of customers, but we have big customers. When we look at the business across, every one of the people we target throughout our extended customer base, we're talking with, the majority of the U.S. population. But again, if you look at specific customer numbers and actually who's paying us, we're talking less than 100. So. We sort of deal with these same types of things, and the question you just need to ask is, look, like, if you did things 5 times, and it worked 3 times, like, is that valuable or not? And there's all sorts of advanced statistics you can apply to try to answer that question. But when you're dealing with numbers 1, 2 through 10, I think sometimes just using your intuition and asking when it's going to be helpful. And I also just think, from a cultural perspective, just getting into the motion of measurement and bringing that into the conversation. It's look, if you have 7 reasons why you should do something, and the 8th is that it worked 3 out of the 5 times in the past, it's like it might be the best argument you have.
Okay, let's get somebody from the back here. Oh, we'll go all the way back here.
Yeah, I have, I guess, a series of questions, but I'll put them all into one. Number 1, did you bootstrap the company? Number 2, why did you decide to go into this business? And number 3, did you build the product first, or did you first get your customers to interest?
Great. So that is 3 separate questions. So I'll try to we'll go through them. This is my second venture-backed startup. So when it, for our first couple rounds, when it came time to raising money, it was it was fairly straightforward for me. So I never considered bootstrapping it because sort of in the situation where I just didn't consider it. Second. In terms of sort of bring the product to market, I think, look, as an entrepreneur, you always want to, I guess in terms of the vision, I guess was your second question. Look, I mean, I think when I think about sort of the next frontier of data, I just think there's a tremendous gap in the market. I think the industry has the technology to to warehouse it and aggregate it. I think we know how to build charts and graphs and how to do fairly simple measurements. I think really the next frontier is taking that and embedding it very deeply into business processes. And we had some insight around customer engagement and retention, and really just my previous business was acquired by Etsy, and while we were there, we really just focused on how do you think about an Etsy seller, an Etsy buyer, and how do you really develop a relationship with these individuals, not just so that they come and buy something for Christmas, but so that they're invested in the platform and the brand and shop in the shopping experience there for time to come. So that's sort of the broader question we're addressing there. And then, look, in terms of what's an MVP and how do you bring a product to market, it varies so much based on what you're doing. And my strong bias is always to go to market too early. If it feels as if you're waiting too late, then I think you're definitely too late. If you're just on time, then you won't know that until much later on. I think especially if you're doing something where you're selling B2B, if you have a strong market thesis, if there are ways you can add value and show that you can come in for some price point, whether it be small or ideally big, if that makes sense, then I think that's always at least my bias on how to develop your hypotheses, and certainly if it's going to work, how to get that early data.
I got time for 2 more questions, I think. So I got one here.
My question is about bias in data, because inherently garbage in, garbage out. I mean, that's the fundamental challenge. So how are you balancing sort of third-party data integrations within your own data collection, and how are you making sure? I'm just curious about your process on like establishing that single source of truth before you can pass the data to other teams.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that I think you hit on something which is super important. And I think when I think about truth, I always joke it took me about 7-8 years into my career before I realized there's no such thing as sort of perfection in data. All you can really hope for is being in parity with a single source that you do view as the truth. And I think when you think about a data strategy, the worst thing that can happen is if you have 5 different teams that are all doing their same data collection, but it's actually a little bit different, and that teams aren't actually even able to agree on common numbers. So I think making sure that the entire organization is centered around what you view as the source of truth, I think is just super critical as part of any data strategy. And I think there are many ways of doing that, and I think ultimately it comes down to the data team to make sure the tools are all in sync. If you're looking at your BI tool and a revenue number there, make sure that it aligns with the same revenue number in Google Analytics, and if there is a discrepancy, know exactly how that accounts.
Let's do one more question. I didn't get anyone in this section here. Anyone? Last chance in this section? Well, I'll go up to this section. One last question, and then Jason's gonna stick around for the networking event, so you can herd and ask him more questions afterwards. But we'll open the bar after this question.
Hey, I'd like to take you back to the slide in self-service versus full service.
Yep.
And I was wondering whether over the course of your operations, if you've identified any heuristics or any cliffs that let you sort of determine where you would like to have a customer operate on the self-service model versus the full service model.
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. I think I guess my practical advice is hire your first person. And then make sure they're 100% full service with every stakeholder in the organization. And then what happens is you have some functions, like maybe your marketing team has an analyst who's very good. And this individual can then go and take the tool and run with it on her own, for a few months, without much support. And that can maybe be the first step of your self-service strategy. So I think, in some sense, it's it really depends on the business, depends on the complexity of your data, and I don't really, unfortunately, have a hard and fast rule for you.
Okay, thanks again, Jason. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.